The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the Rabbinical Assembly, and Temple of Aaron. Today is the third day after Shabbat Kodesh, the first of Tammuz 5786, Rosh Chodesh, corresponding in the secular calendar to Tuesday, June 16th, 2026. We will read Parashat Korach this coming Shabbat. Let's begin. Me'am Loez, Parashat Korach. Today is the second day of learning on our Parsha of Korach, and we spoke about yesterday some of the issues that Korach had, that the law seemed illogical to him, and he began to become convinced that really Moses was doing this just for his own self-aggrandizement, and that is really what we're going to continue with that idea today. You know, Korach noticed almost all the beautiful things about Judaism, and the way he interpreted them were for a negative, according to the Midrash. For example, we know in the Torah that it says that you need to give a teruma to the Kohen, right? There's a certain portion that needs to be taken out and given to the Kohen. It's this beautiful gift to the Kohanim, because the Kohanim don't have work that they do or can't own land and everything like that, and they have a sacred task to do. But the way Korach saw this is that this is all just so that the Kohanim get more profits, and that it's just selfishness for them. We also see that the Levites in Parshat Balotcha, that the Levites their bodies were completely shaved to purify them for service in the Mishkan, and then they were waved in every which direction like a lulav. Right? If you were listening, like 2 weeks ago or so, I talked about this midrash, this idea that Aaron picked up each Levite and shook them like a lulav in all directions. Of course, this was meant to purify them, to inaugurate them from service, but the way in which Korach interpreted this was in order to insult them and in order to embarrass them. And it really just shows how you look at what is happening. It's so easy to look at the requirements of the Torah and the obligations of the Torah as just something meant to humiliate you or hurt you. And it just depends on your emotional state and how you're thinking about it, not what the actual actions are. The intention is so important. So he really believes that Moses is just here to laugh at us, to insult everybody. And this is a real problem, because and I think the reason I think what this is supposed to teach us here is that it's not just the Torah and the Torah in itself that is good, right? And that does goodness, but it's also the intention of why God does these things. We have to ask questions like, why? What do these mitzvot really mean? To try to get in the inner DNA of what the mitzvot and obligations that we need to do actually are. Otherwise, we end up sometimes being like Korach and just regretting them or resenting them. And Judaism and the practices of it can be create real anger and resentment, and that actually makes us become like Korach and have a misunderstanding of Judaism, Torah, and God. So very, very important that we internalize this, because this, of course, can happen to all of us. It's one of the reasons why we need to be so deep in our Torah learning and constantly learning the meaning behind things and why we're doing what we're doing, so we don't end up becoming Korach, right? And end up leading a rebellion against Moshe and a rebellion against Torah in general. We'll continue on with this tomorrow. Mishnah Torah. Let's go on to the 8th halacha of chapter 1 of the laws of Kriyat Shema. It begins, Hiktim bracha shniya lebracha rishona. If you say the first bracha before the second bracha, if you say, let's say in this case, if you say ahava rabbah or ahavat olam before Yotzer or Ma'ariv Haravim, depending on whether it's night or during the day, Bein biyom, bein belayla, whether it's day or whether it's night, bein lefaneha, bein lachareya, whether you say it before it or after it, whichever order, yatsa lefi she'ein seder habrachot. So the Rambam actually says here, you can actually reverse the order if you really want. It just matters that you say the brachot, and not specifically which order they come in. B'shachrit petach yotzer or v'siyam ma'ariv aravim lo yatsa. But if in the morning you say the blessing that should be said for the evening in that place, like for example, if you say ma'ariv aravim in the morning and not yotzer or, you're not considered that you've fulfilled the obligation to say these brachot. They need to be said They do need to be said. The morning blessing needs to be said in the morning. The evening blessing needs to be said in the evening. And that makes sense because that's what they're thematically about. It wouldn't make sense to bless God for the setting of the sun when the sun has just risen. So that makes sense here. He continues, Patach b'ma'ariv aravim v'siyam b'yotzer or yatsa. But if you open with ma'ariv aravim, but you end with yotzer or, meaning you start the blessing for it to sound like the evening bracha, and it's the morning, but you end it with the correct blessing, with the chatima at the end, the signature at the end of the blessing, which is Baruch Atah Hashem Yotzer HaMeorot. If you end with that particular blessing, it's considered okay, because in the end, what really matters in brachot in general is the last sentence. That's the one that really, really cannot change in any way, shape, or form. Be'erev petach b'ma'ariv aravim v'siyam b'yotzer or lo yatsa. And so too, if in the evening you open with ma'ariv aravim, but you end with yotzer or, you are actually have not fulfilled your bracha. You have not fulfilled what you need to fulfill. So actually, this is a true rule in the morning. If you begin with ma'ariv aravim and you end with yotzer or, you are exempt. In the evening, if you open with Ma'ariv Aravim and you end with the Yotzer Or, even though you're supposed to be ending with Ma'ariv Aravim, you actually do not fulfill the bracha. And then he goes on and he continues in the last sentence. He says, if you open in Yotzer Or, if you open with the blessing of Yotzer Or, but you finish in the evening with Ma'ariv Aravim, you are Yatsa. You actually do fulfill the bracha. You actually are able to fulfill it. And he then says, Shekola brachot holchot achar chatimatan. Because in the end, what really does matter is how we end the bracha, right? So if in the end we say the bracha of Yotzer HaMaorot in the morning, then we've passed. We haven't done what's ideal, but we've passed. We've done what we need to do. We don't have to try to do it again or do it in some other way. And same thing with night. As long as we say Ma'ariv Aravim at the end of the bracha, even if we start with Yotzer Or, it would still be considered acceptable. Now, I think when putting this halacha with what we learned yesterday, if you were listening, that none of the words of the brachot can be changed, I think is really a conversation about the ideal versus like the absolute minimum. Right? Ideally, and like you're writing Sidurim, you can't like choose in general to say just different words than what the Siddur has. That's not acceptable. But if it happens that you do say different words on a one-time basis or made a mistake or something like that, then in that case, what really matters is the chatima, is the signature at the end of getting that right. And then if we get it right, then we don't have to do it again. It's considered passable. And I think that's really important. So we shouldn't mistake what's being said here of saying, oh, actually we can change the brachot as long as we don't change the chatimot, the signatures, the blessings at the end. Now, I think this is important. One of the reasons why I myself, although I'm certainly an egalitarian, do not say the gender-sensitive version of the Amidah that's printed in the Siddur Sim Shalom is because of this halacha. We don't change the words of the brachot. And I know many of us want to add Sarah in and Rebecca and Rachel, and we see a bunch of males and we want to add females in, and I get that impulse. But that is against halacha. That's against to change the words of the brachot. We're supposed to keep the words of the bracha, and even more so, a middle position might be, okay, maybe you'll change the words in the beginning of the Amidah, but not the Chatima itself, because we learned that the signature truly of the blessing, that last sentence, is really the most important thing and marks whether we've done the bracha or not. So at least there may be an intermediary position. If you really felt strongly, maybe there might be an intermediary position just for changing everything else, but keeping the Chatima. But unfortunately, within the conservative movement, the bracha here at the end is changed. We add in not just Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah, we add in at the end. And so, I mean, the question is open for me. Me as one individual rabbi, I don't say ufoket tzara because, again, I think it violates the Rambam here and it violates the halacha as set out within the Gemara. But I know there are many rabbis who do say it, so I do, I guess, wonder how they halachically understand what they're doing and how that makes halachic sense. And I think that's probably the majority of our movement now says that bracha. So I guess I do wonder, what halacha they're relying on their basis to be able to do that. But that's a different question for a different day. And I just think it's important that you make thoughtful decisions about what you're saying during davening and making sure that it is in harmony with halacha. And if you're not, or if you're doing something different than is traditional, to really understand, is this halachically acceptable, or is this just something I want to do because it happens to match my values and happens to match contemporary thinking. It's really important that we separate those two. Menorat HaMaor. We'll continue on today with the second installation of this story from the introduction to the first candle of Menorat HaMaor. This beautiful, beautiful story, very interesting story, very deep story. And I would say for this particular episode, it would be great if you could listen to the Menorat HaMaor yesterday, because we're going to start in the middle of a story. I'll try to summarize some of it, but if you want a deeper treatment of it, you should definitely listen to the Menorat HaMaor from yesterday. So this is a story about Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, and he is basically made a comment to a Roman police officer saying how he can do a better job investigating criminals and so that to make sure to arrest the right people. And the word gets back to the Roman Empire that he said this. So the Roman Empire basically says, well, then you do the job. You be the cop. So he starts arresting people. And of course, he's arresting many Jews because it's a Jewish community that he lives in. And so Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha gets angry at him and says to him, what are you getting all these Jews killed for? And he says, well, I'm just cleaning up the thorns from the vineyard. I'm just cleaning up the few bad thorns. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha basically says back to him, let God handle that. Who made you in charge? Kind of. And so that's kind of where we left off our story. Well, the story continues that one day a certain launderer met him, meaning Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, and called out, vinegar, son of wine, which is actually the same insult that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha made as well, and said, since he has such brazenness, it may be inferred that he is wicked. He said to them, arrest him. So this kind of random person, it's very different than Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha sort of going up to him, but this, launderer, this kind of, regular random Jew person comes up to him, calls him the same thing. And he reacts very differently. He kind of has an argument with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha because, of course, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha is one of them. He's a rabbi, but this is just it's a regular person, and you could see that the words are, I think, from Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha in the previous conversation are sort of beginning to get in his head, and he gets frustrated, and so he says, since he has such brazenness, it may be inferred that he is wicked. He said to them, arrest him, meaning, man, you must be so full of chutzpah, right, of brazenness and nerve to say that to someone as powerful as me or a rabbi like me. How could you possibly say that? And if you choose to say that, then you must be a wicked person and therefore arrest him. Obviously, this is not a judicious move in any way, shape, or form, and I think you can show how easy it is to become corrupted by power, even if you are quite a righteous person, and especially when your mind is not working correctly and you're upset and angry. And the Gemara actually knows this when it says afterwards, when his mind settled, which means that by negation, I think what the Gemara is saying is that his mind wasn't settled before, right? It was very upset before. And you could see how someone reacts when their mind is not settled when doing justice. When his mind settled, he sought to release him, but he could not. He was greatly distressed over him and applied to himself the verse, whoever guards his mouth and his tongue guards his soul from troubles. They hanged him, and they killed this person from what Rabbi Elazar did. And Rabbi Elazar stood beneath the gallows and wept. They said to him, Rabbi, and so we'll get to what they say to him in a second, but we could see the tragedy Rabbi Elazar knew a better way to deal with criminals, but the second he was made in a position of power, what does he do? He does just what the Roman officer was to do, was just to arrest someone who didn't deserve necessarily to be arrested, or didn't have at least proof that he should be arrested. And it shows that power does corrupt everyone. And if you do have power, someone's got to have power in this world and do justice. It's actually a mitzvah. It requires tremendous, tremendous oversight and tremendous, tremendous responsibility. And even the most righteous person can fall into an abuse of power and it's real evil, real harmful evil when they have this kind of power in their hands. But interestingly enough, the people say back to Rabbi Elazar as he's standing beneath the gallows, sorry about what he did. I mean, what a dramatic scene. They say to him, Rabbi, do not be distressed, for he and his son had relations with a betrothed maiden on Yom Kippur. Meaning, don't worry, he's terrible. He's really, really awful. He's done everything bad in the world. He deserved to die. And at that point, he is calmed and he says, rejoice, my innards, rejoice. And he feels better, at least, that this person who he really sent to death deserved to die, that did many, many sins that would make him liable for this kind of punishment. Look, I think they make him feel better in the end. They comfort him that, look, the man deserved to die anyway, and God often makes justice happen the way it should happen anyway, even if you didn't mean it to, even if you didn't know it, then thank God God's hand is involved with this. But I think we should still learn the lesson here of how easy it is to abuse power. But that being said, like the reason the Menorat HaMaor is actually bringing this text in the first place is to show us that we should actually do this, that we should be chutzpah enough to do justice and not be afraid that we're going to be insulted by community members or rabbis or other leaders. But if we think something is the morally right thing to do, and we need to stand up against something that truly is evil and hurting of someone else, where justice truly isn't being done, the Gemara is telling us that we need to go and be jealous, and this good kind of jealousy for God, to stand up and do what needs to be done, and disregard the comments that are made towards you about it. But if you're going to choose to make that decision, then you need to be extremely judicious of how you use your power, and you need to be extremely, extremely humble and righteous in your actions. Because this can be abused so very easily. And often the people who want to do justice, who want to do good, are often the people who create the greatest abuses. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.